Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Fireside Chat with Father Greg Boyle. We're so glad you're here with us. Hopefully you've been chiming in during the day for our content with harm healing and human dignity. What a great way to end the evening with a conversation with Father Greg and Ralph McLeod. We are glad that you're here. As we are coming into the room, please go ahead and put your name in the chat and let us know where you're coming from. If it's a place or a ministry or a school, you're representing a delegation, let us know. We'd like to see kind of who's with us. Hi, Chandra. Franciscans from Minnesota. Hi, Kathy and Scott from Gardner, Maine. Greg from Tallahassee. We got folks from Orange, California, the Bay Area. Lots of folks from California today. Kansas City, Daytona Beach, Florida, Tallahassee. Joseph House, great to see you all. We got folks from Mississippi, Arkansas. Great. Hi, Leonard from Insight Prison Project. Great to have you with us. Sisters, hi, Louise. Sister Louise from the Sisters of St. Joseph. Oh, so many great people. Oh, so glad you're here. Well, welcome. From wherever you're coming in, we are glad that you're here. We wanted to just go over a couple of housekeeping things. Of course, please introduce yourself. If you're just coming in now, make yourself comfortable. You'll see Ralph has a little fire behind him. This is a fireside chat after all. So just get comfortable and get ready for the conversation. You can change the name on your screen. You can adjust your screen to show speakers, in the upper right-hand corner. You can change your view to gallery, to speaker, however is most comfortable for you in this setting. Some considerations around the chat. We are certainly going to ask you for your questions, but we're also, we're here to listen as well. So use your judgment on spending time with that chat. We're listening, we're giving our attention, and then we are welcoming questions later on. Let's see. Also, if you have any tech troubles, you'll see that Jeff is on tech, so he's got the tech in front of his name. You can send him messages if you're having any technical issues. So, next, what do we have next? Oh, with sponsors, I think we have some, we've got a whole bunch of sponsors that are part of the Harm Healing and Human Dignity Conference, and we are grateful to them. So take a look at our sponsors and congratulate them with us for their support. All righty. Well, I'm just going to kick us off. I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce this conversation tonight between two people I admire greatly. Father Greg Boyle is a Jesuit priest and founder of Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. Father Greg is the author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. His latest book, Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship, was published in 2017. Father Greg, a few years back, I was in LA. I visited Homeboy Industries. I had lunch at Homegirl Cafe, because it's what you do when you're in LA. And there is such a grounded spirit and positive energy about Homeboy Industries. You can feel it. Father Greg, you have inspired generations in the pews and well beyond to see the dignity in everyone, especially those who are incarcerated or gang involved. For decades, your ministry and witness has been tireless in communicating God's mercy. how fitting it is that you are with us at the Harm, Healing, and Human Dignity Conference, at the intersection of Catholic social tradition and restorative justice principles, both of which value human dignity at their core. And Ralph McLeod, he's hosting Father Greg for this discussion tonight. Ralph is the executive director of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the National Anti-Poverty Program of the U.S. Catholic Bishops. Ralph McLeod is the board chair of Catholic Mobilizing Network, and we are grateful. Prior to working with the bishops, Ralph worked as the director of pastoral and community services in the Diocese of Fort Worth. And his ministry there included leading the ministry to the incarcerated in that diocese. Before Ralph was professionally engaged in church leadership, he had a political career, serving 4 terms in the Fort Worth City Council and 3 terms as mayor tempore in Fort Worth. Welcome, Father Greg and Ralph.
Thank you, Chris Ann. It's great to be here, and I do feel compelled to make a bit of confession, both to all the folks who are gathered, but particularly to Father Greg Boyle, in that when I first got asked to do this, I had said to myself that I was not going to be awe-inspired or awe in a spirit of awe, because you're going to be in this little bitty box and you want to be in the same place of being able to inspire me the way that you did. And the many times I've seen and heard you before. But it ain't true. You're still in this little box, and I'm still intimidated by your presence, and really amazed to be able to have this conversation with you one-on-one. I will say that it's a bit of a huge understatement to say that Father Greg works with young people. That's a huge understatement. But rather, he walks with young people. He walks with folks who, by a lot of folks' definitions, have blemishes, have difficulties, have challenges in life, who in many cases folks have given up on. Father Greg, I guess first got exposed to you with Father Greg and the Homeboys. I mean, and the book that Christiane referred to is one of my favorites and kind of a go-to book whenever I'm doing presentations. Father, I wonder if you might, for the folks who are gathered here, and for me yet one more time, share with us your journey. There's been a lot of priests, a lot of parishes, but what led you to Dolores Mission? What led you to Homeboy Industries? What led you to be the pastoral companion of so many lives that have been enhanced and have saved? What drove you there? I recognize you had the wonderful experiences in both Bolivia and as a chaplain in Mexico, but what was it? What was it even before that?
Well, thank you, Ralph, and thank you, Chrisanne. It's a real privilege to be with all of you. Yeah, well, I was after I was ordained, I was in Bolivia, and then I was supposed to go to Santa Clara University of Santa Clara to kind of run their outreach immersion program, and it kind of wasn't enough for me after I had been to Bolivia, which kind of ruined me for life. So then I went to my provincial. I said, I feel called to work with the poor. Send me to the poorest place we have, and I spoke Spanish. So he sent me to Dolores Mission, the poorest parish in the city, nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. And we had 8 gangs at war when I arrived. So this was, so I didn't really know very much at all. But then once I was there, I found a vocation within a vocation within a vocation. So, and so I've been kind of here in Los Angeles working with gang members for 37 years now, I guess.
I was struck every time I was able to hear you present, talk, and share with us in the past. You would never travel alone. You always have a couple of youngsters with you, who you refer to as homeboys. And these were not the people who carried your bags or the people who your body men. These were people who you would bring to the presentations or to the speech and put them to work. And they were liberated enough to share their story in both spirit and in truth, and in a way that oftentimes touched the hearts of the folks who were gathered there, because they were so in many ways painfully honest. And in some ways, they had to turn to you and ask you, is it okay to say a particular word that might have been profane or a little bit deep or something that make us understand their situations a whole lot better. Talk about, if you will, your relationships with the young people. I understand that you've buried, over 150. I'm not even sure that the count. I've lost count, but buried and the relationships you've had with those and those families in that community. Talk, if you would, a little bit about the relationships you have with the young people there and how they've touched you in so many ways.
Well, I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988, and I will bury my 238th early next week, a young man named James. And so it continues, the violence. Nothing like the decade of death, which was 88 to 98, but every death is a huge loss. And this kid, James, had a great tender heart, has left 3 kids behind. So, and we run the gamut, 14 is as young as they get, but, we've had people who spent 30 years in prison, so they're my age, and so it's a kind of the age range that's quite expansive. And but every homie who walks through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can really scale that wall is tenderness. So we try to foster tenderness in each other so that we can be attentive to the homies who come through, and they can be held in a safe place. And and they come in, and then they can suddenly breathe more easily, and then they start to breathe differently. They start to find a resilience that they never knew before. And if it's true enough that the traumatized are more likely to cause trauma, it's equally true that the cherished will find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So, the Buddhists talk about a sangha, it's a community of practitioners, and we all practice it, which is why I don't always take homies. Well, this is like 8 months ago was the last time I went to New York and Chicago and had 2 homies and who'd been to prison, and we had a wonderful time, and and they got up and told their stories. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you get scorched. And I think it sort of led everybody in the audience to truly stand in awe at what they had to carry, rather than in judgment at how they carry it. It's sort of why I always bring them. It's in the early days when the demonizing of gang members was such a wholesale thing. I would tell stories about homies, or I would bring homies, because you wanted to put a human face on it, because you were choosing to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing would stop. And then later on, I think as the demonizing diminished, and I'm happy to say it did, then there was this, how do we move beyond judgment, away from judgment, and get closer to awe? In the Acts of the Apostles, it says, and awe came upon everyone. And so the measure of health in any community really resides in our ability to stand in awe at what folks have to carry. And then we all become, friends with our own brokenness and our own wound. And it keeps us from being tempted to despise the wounded. And that's kind of the hope in bringing homies to kind of tell their experience, because we're quick to judge as human beings. And it's nice to hear people who know that they're a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done, so they don't identify with it anymore.
That's beautiful, to stand in awe and not in judgment. I in a way, a lot of the folks who are on this call are the choir, and then there's what I would refer to as being woke. But I wonder if you might share with us or reaffirm with us some of the conditions and things that these young people have to go through to that you shared in books and stories over the years, that they have to go through, that should elicit awe in us and not judgment, should elicit a sense of awful, in the good sense of the word, awful compassion and not demonizing.
Yeah, earlier today I spoke to a big conference at Children's Hospital. Again, you do it all Zoom, but and it was addressing the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACEs study. And so there's a great book called The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke-Harris, who's our Surgeon General here in the state of California. And it's about the ACEs study, the 10 checklist and of traumas that if you've experienced them under the age of 18 and under, she says if you're 4 out of the 10 checklist, 4 or 5, that kid is going to have serious health issues as an adult. And I would add difficulties in socializing.
Sure.
If you're a 4 or 5. Now, I grew up in the gang capital of the world. I won every lottery, the parent lottery, the mental health lottery, the zip code lottery, all the white privilege lotteries. None of that makes me morally superior to the folks I've been privileged to know. So I'm a 0 on the ACEs. But every man or woman who walks through our doors, 15,000 of them a year, every single one is a 9 or a 10 on the ACEs, which is, whoa, that's just so huge. And so once folks come to know that, and the 10 are things like, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, parent in prison, parent mentally ill, parent addicted to drugs. There are 10 of them. And if you've been exposed to these things, and to the tune of 9 or 10 out of 10, then that's just staggering. And so it should lead us not to kind of say, wow, how come you're not making better choices? Well, I mean, not all choices are created equal. Right. So I think morality is the least helpful thing when it comes to understanding the gulf that exists between the haves and the have-nots, and those who have access to things and those who don't, and the great disparity in the difference between everything from healthcare to education to job opportunities, you name it. So my hope is that at some point we will bridge the distance that exists, that we will eliminate the least helpful thing, which is this striking of the high moral distance that separates us, and get to a place of real awe and understanding of what people have to carry, which is, I've never had to carry in my 66 years of living. I've never had to carry what the folks at Homeboy have to carry. And so And the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than they are. So it's an easy thing to allow my heart to be altered by them, and to be reached by them, and to receive them. I've never felt tempted to transform their lives, or to fix them, or rescue them, or save them. Quite the opposite. You know, my salvation is sort of connected to this, you know, in the most selfish way, that you go to the margins not to make a difference, but so that the folks at the margins make you different.
Yeah.
And then it's about us. Then it's exquisitely mutual. And then but if you go to the margins to make a difference, then it's about you.
Hmm.
But you want to make sure it's always about us. And that in every step we're obliterating the illusion that we are separate.
Yeah, it's that mutual reciprocating grace, as opposed to that patriarchal, I know what's best for you. And this is, but the reality of how we're tied up in each other's salvation is so beautiful, that's exhibited in so much of your work. And I'm also struck by the fact that you, that in terms of those deficits that you referred to, that you and your ministry has looked towards eliminating some of those deficits. One that sticks out for me, when I was there, seeing young people with T-shirts that said, "Nothing stops a bullet like a job," or something like that. And I'm paraphrasing
No, that's right.
beautifully. But the reality of the importance of work, the dignity associated with work, and removing that whole myth that young people don't want to work, and that they're lazy, but the reality is that they want to participate and contribute to their own individual futures, and they want to do better for themselves. It's something that Homeboy Industries has illustrated on several different levels. I remember there was once a time that there was a silk screening, there was landscaping, there was bakery, there was food service, all of which, you know, young people decide that they want to, they don't want the bullet, but they want the job. Talk a little bit about Homeboy Industries on a broad level. Again, I don't want to assume that everybody on the call knows or appreciates just the work that's been able to come from that, if you don't mind, Father.
Yeah. So, you know, I think in the early days we started a school, and then we started a jobs program to, you know, identify felony-friendly employers willing to hire gang members. And then we couldn't find those folks, so we just started things: maintenance crew, landscaping crew, graffiti removal crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rivals from the 8 warring gangs just in my parish. So it began just as a parish thing. And then it grew to deal with the 60 gangs, 10,000 gang members in what we call the Hollenbeck Police Precinct. And then now we serve the whole county. So there's not a gang member in any zip code or gang that doesn't know who we are and what we are and what we do. So we don't exist for those who need help. It's only for those who want it. So you have to kind of walk through the door, just like any recovery program. And so the 18-month training program is kind of the centerpiece. But our principle kind of evolved over the years. You know, we would say, well, an educated gang member may or may not go back to prison, or an employed one may or may not. But now it's our contention, in fact, guarantee, that a healed gang member won't ever go back to, will never reoffend and go back to prison. So that's become the centerpiece, you know, that the homies themselves always talk about, you know, you have to do the work, and it's kind of an inner work. And so there's a lot of therapy and a lot of group stuff. But I think the secret sauce at Homeboy are probably our cultural competence is what we call a therapeutic mysticism, which means we see the wholeness in people. And once people are seeing the wholeness in them, they see that in themselves. And the homies, you know, they're used to being watched because they're all came from prison, most of them, but they're not used to being seen. And so
Mm.
we want to see them, you know, and as the Buddhists say, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. And so we're always reminding people of the truth of who they are. And when you remind people of that in a culture of tenderness that nurtures them, then they become that truth. Then they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. And this kid, James, I call him a kid, he's in his 30s. But he knew the truth of who he was. He worked for us many years ago. And once you have a dose of that, that's compelling. And death can't touch it because it's really that large. So after 18 months, you know, we find him another job beyond Homeboy, and the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they're not going to be toppled by it, which is kind of the key resilient moment, you know. So we're not that interested in surviving as the fittest, but thriving as the nurtured. And there are certainly a lot of things, especially in terms of restorative justice and addressing mass incarceration, that need to get addressed at the policy level and how people govern in individual states and et cetera. But on the ground, you know, part of our own advocacy is embodied. You know, it's with people as they really carry more things than most. People whose burdens are more than they can bear, and people whose dignity has been denied. So you create a community that that cherishes them, and that's as compelling as anything. I think in the early days when we listened to gang members and they said, job, 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 you know, if only we had a job. And so that's what we did. But I think probably 15 years in, once we knew gang members, we knew that healing was sort of the essential piece. So we still do jobs, but we've kind of shifted to this other place that, you know, kids join gangs because of a lethal absence of hope, and because they're so traumatized they haven't been able to find their way clear to transform their pain so they can cease to transmit it. And then, you know, mental health issues. So these are all things that we want to address and announce in our country. You know, what if we were to infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign? What if we helped create communities of healing? What if we, you know, delivered mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way? What if we did all those things? What if we stood against forgetting that we belong to each other? You know, because part of the issue, I think, for me is that it's always less about getting to solutions and more about getting to each other.
Right.
You know, and you know, the great John Lewis said, we all live in the same house. But, you know, he didn't qualify that. He didn't say, you know, some people live in the basement and some people live on the third floor. No, he said, we all live in the same house. He didn't say, one day maybe we'll live in the same house. He just says it straight out. We live in the same house. It's kind of the essential truth. And that, you know, Jesus says that you may be one. And that's God's dream come true, is this kinship, this connection. And I think our God is so generous that it's not even about God. It's about us. It's about God's dream coming true, that there is no us and them, there's just us, and that we recognize we all live in the same house. So I can't even remember what the question was, but there you have it.
But you answered it. You definitely answered it, and answered it well. Father, you know, another confession, you know, many years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, when I first heard you use the phrase homies and homeboys, I took a little bit of of offense because I thought that was my word. He's referring to people outside of this community or outside of this base. I've come to learn, how desperately wrong I was, as I've heard you refer to that whole essence of us all living in the same house and kinship. But I heard you a few years ago actually describe what a homie means to you. And it has nothing to do necessarily with geography or living in the same neighborhood, but the
Well,
relationship.
it's interesting. I'm trying to think, maybe it's a California thing, but this, twice, two separate occasions, I was on a talk call-in radio show in Chicago, different stations, years apart. And people called in and they were offended that I had called this organization Homeboy Industries, that somehow it was, I don't know what they thought, but Californians are probably more, maybe more comfortable than folks in Chicago or something, but where we just say homies, and it's not even gang members. It's, hey, do you know Mr. Garcia, the math teacher? Yeah, that's the homie right there. It's their way of saying I'm connected. Yeah. And so you kind of want to go in their door, but come out another door, So we have enemies, guys who used to shoot at each other. Everyone has multiple of those people at Homeboy, but there they are, standing side by side, making croissants in the Homeboy bakery, and they hate each other, and they used to shoot at each other. And their animosity is personal and deep and goes back years. And then they become the deepest kind of friends. Now, does that always happen at Homeboy Industries? Yes.
It does. It does.
Any exceptions? No. Nobody can think of an exception when that didn't happen at Homeboy. And it's because of the culture. And it's the thing we most want to expose people to. And in the old days, if somebody tested dirty or just disappeared or got arrested, we used to kind of lament. We used to say, maybe they'll be back. Nobody says that now, probably for the last 10 years of our 32-year existence. Nobody says that now. They all say, they'll be back. And there's kind of a certainty about it that is unshakable, and they all come back. I just had a guy yesterday come in, and he'd been gone for a couple of years, went to prison, a good guy, but he came back. It's what happens, because once you have a dose of unconditional high regard that people hold you in, and that it's the most compelling thing there is. That's why when I travel around the country before the pandemic, you run into programs and everybody has the same menu of services. We deliver these services. It's all the same. But I think what's missing sometimes is, how do you keep those programs from becoming the DMV? Please see number window 43 to receive the anger management service, or to receive the domestic violence class certification, or whatever it is. And we do all those things too, but boy, are they secondary to the culture of tenderness and the healing ethos. That's the most important piece. And the odd thing is, it's the culture of care and tenderness that enables them to finish their GED or get their diploma or go on to community college. It's the culture of tenderness that helps them become better parents and parent in such a way as they were never parented themselves. So all these things they're all these byproducts of the fact that they've been nurtured in a place that held them in high regard always.
Well, I want to invite folks who are listening, who are on the call, to, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. When you spoke Father, about the byproducts, it reminded me of a story of yours that I use from time to time from Tattoos on the Heart. And you may recall this about Juan, who approached you about singing at Mass one Sunday, at the early Mass, and you graciously said, "Sure, you can go ahead and sing." And he sang a song after communion, and it was less than Grammy material. It was terrible. He sang it terribly, and I think you said he was screeching, and it sounded like someone was killing dead animals in the book. And then the second Mass came, and you saw him getting ready to approach the microphone again. Instead of you snatching the microphone away from him or saying that he couldn't go up there and make that same mistake, he got up there and sang the same song a cappella that sounded just as bad and just as pitiful, maybe even a little bit worse. But what happened afterwards, I think, was what was so telling, in that you approached him and told him that it takes a great deal of courage to go up and stand before a group of people and sing. And it takes a great group of courage to be able to do that. And a couple of his homies, your homies, were standing by and heard the exchange of talking about how important it was, how it took courage for him to do that. And they responded, "Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to go up there, especially when your ass can't sing." But it spoke to me in several different ways, excuse the language, but it spoke in different ways. First, there was the church. There was the church and the spiritual experience. There was the comfort, if you will, of being able to know that he was going to be supported by you. And then even beyond that, after the folks were, the young people who were teasing him about it, they all had this joint communal laugh together. So it spoke to community. All of that, I think, that was fostered right there in the community. And I think all of that, you were instrumental in. You were instrumental in allowing him to do it. He felt comfortable in doing it. He felt comfortable enough to do it again a second time, but also felt that there would be no repercussions.
But it was also because it took place in a detention facility, and there were back-to-back masses. And this was, in those days, it was a youth authority facility, which means very young and very seriously offending and violent young men. So there was a first Mass, and then there was a second Mass, and then there were what you would call in prison anyway, clerks. Mm-hmm. And the racial divide is so pronounced, as you know, in detention facilities. But my clerks were a Latino, African-American, and a white kid. And it was the Latino who got up to speak, to sing. And both times it was just horrific. But I knew I had to say something. I knew I had to compliment him. And so they were all standing there, all the clerks. And it was, the key point of the story was that it was so racially, it was unlike the institution itself, which was so, Blacks over here, the Latinos over here, everybody else is over here. And it's so pronounced. And these three guys loved each other. Mm-hmm. And they didn't care what the institution and the other inmates thought about it. They were friends. And so I said, that was my key kind of compliment. It takes a lot of courage to get up and read in front of people, but whoa, it takes even more courage to get up and sing. And then the African-American kid said, and it takes even more courage to get up and sing when your ass can't sing, and I thought this would ignite a fight, but it didn't. They just dissolved in each other's arms. They fell on the floor. They thought this was the funniest thing. The guy who sang was not the least bit defensive about it. And suddenly kinship so quickly, where you say, there is no us and them, there's just us. And it was a kind of, on some level, their friendship announced a message to a very racially segregated institution that we don't want any part of this. And it was, it took a lot of courage actually for them to assert that in their friendship. And I hadn't thought about that story in many years. I had hair when that story happened.
Thank you. You refreshed my memory. I was trying to go for memory, but now you made it even more compelling. What's Homeboy look like in 2020? I mean, with COVID, how are things going? And I guess fires and
Yeah, well, the fires are far enough away from where we are because we're in the heart of downtown. But yeah, we kind of pivoted, right as the pandemic hit, and we, have we're addressing food insecurity in LA County. So we have got these immediate contracts with the city and the county, and then with Jose Andres, his World Central Kitchen.
Mhm.
So with the combination of those three contracts, we provide and prepare 17,000 meals a week. So we just shifted the bakery and the cafe because both were, well, the cafe in particular was closed, and so was catering because nobody was hiring. And so we shifted right away. So we haven't had to lay off anybody. And
that's great.
yeah, kind of remarkable. So we're open because the mayor considers us an essential organization. So we kind of stagger things. We have really strict protocol. We take temperature as they walk in. They do questions. They make sure the building doesn't exceed a certain number. Everybody wears masks and keeps their distance. So, but I've had to bury any number of folks because of COVID. I even have had 2 double funerals, a homie and his father, and a homie's mother and his grandmother. And so, yeah, I mean, and as we all know, poor people of color have disproportionately been impacted by the pandemic, and so I've witnessed that, of course, and as we all have.
Sure. I meant to do this very early on, but I again, I was so awestruck that it slipped my mind. But I wanted to congratulate you and Homeboy Industries for being the 2020 recipient of the Hilton Prize. Congratulations, and it's something that you make us proud.
Hey, well, thank you. It's their 25th anniversary, and I think only 3 times in 25 years has an organization, only 3 times, I guess, organizations, nonprofits in the United States have been acknowledged this way and recognized. And so we're the first time in Los Angeles, and the Hilton Foundation is their home base is Los Angeles. So it's kind of significant in their 25th year. Normally they give $2 million, and then we were on the Zoom when they kind of surprised us and told us, and they said, and because it's our 25th year, we're going to add, 0.5 to the prize. So that kind of startled us too. So it was, and boy, is it helpful. I mean, we're a $22 million annual operation, so it's a huge help.
Do you have any relationship with the either municipal or other institutions, the sheriff's departments, police departments, that are that are favorable, that you're able to work together to help achieve, I guess, joint goals, I guess, in terms of community safety?
Yeah, I mean, we don't work at odds with them, but I think there's I think we always get asked that question: do you work with the police? And the presumption being that gang violence is primarily a crime issue, but it's our contention that it's a community health issue. I don't even call it a public health issue. I call it a community health issue. So it's about all these things that law enforcement doesn't have any impact on. Like hope for kids to help them imagine tomorrow, or healing for folks so they don't have to stay stuck in their you know, pain.
Mhm.
And then mental health services. So, and none of those have anything to do with law enforcement. So I'm always trying to advocate for a different container and a
Mm.
wider view to see it, you know, because we get stuck at the level of law enforcement, and people are willing to say, you know, call us when this problem is over to law enforcement. And yet it's really such a deep, you know, it's all about it. They're indicators, it's symptoms. It's the homies always say, you know, you got to find the thorn underneath. And it means, you know, what language is this violence speaking? And because if you just want to kind of get rid of violence, then it's not very sophisticated. It's kind of ham-handed.
Mhm.
And you want to get underneath it. Well, what's this violence mean? You know, like we had a fight yesterday. It doesn't happen very often. But, you know, a fist fight, 3, 4 guys. And we're just kind of, all of us there are experienced enough that it's, what does this mean? Let's find the thorn underneath. And then life gets very, then you have a high degree of reverence for how complex things are. It's not about you've colored outside the lines and now you're all fired, you know, because we exist for folks like this. But, and then they felt greatly remorseful. They felt they had let me down and disrespected me. And obviously that pain is greater than just about anything. I think they would have preferred to be fired rather than experience that pain, like they had disappointed me. And, you know, I always say, oh, I'm too busy loving you. I don't have any time left to be disappointed in you. But you want to get underneath, what's this about? What else is going on? How could we have done this differently?
Mhm.
And so then it becomes all learning, but it's not, you know, nobody needed to be arrested or fired or banished or, you know, and so it's a good lesson, you know, because the largest mental institution in the United States of America is the LA County Jail, which tells us something very significant. It tells us how badly we're handling things. And so my hope is that we will find alternatives to handling things like that.
Right, confronting institutions or systems that prioritize incarceration or warehousing more than mental health assistance. Yeah. Someone asked about, there's a question about what your experience has been or feedback has been in talking to gang members who are currently in prison.
Well, we get, you know, many thousands of letters every year from folks in prison. And so they're mainly asking for, you know, information and letters of support, because everybody's going to the boards, their parole board. And, you know, again, pre-pandemic, it's hard to even retrieve it. It seems so far long ago. But anyway, I used to always I've been to, you know, I go to all the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you kind of, you get invited and you go, and maybe I'll do a mass or I'll give several talks. And then I'll just walk the rows, you know, to kind of talk to people. But, you know, it's funny. The other thing, when you go to programs that are comparable to Homeboy or around the country, the number one question they ask often is, how do you get gang members to go there? And honest to God, that's never been a problem for us in 32 years. They come to us, and we don't ever coax or recruit or hand out flyers or go to street corners and, you know, why don't you give us a try? You know, when they're ready. But Homeboy is a little bit like an AA meeting, you know, like who's there? Somebody who's 20 years sober, somebody who's 20 minutes sober, and somebody who's drunk, but he's there. And that's kind of how we operate, that people are, it's on a continuum of readiness, and we like that. And we're reverse cherry pickers. We don't pick folks who will give us good evidence-based outcomes. We want the opposite. We want the gnarly, the belligerent, the hard-headed. That's the guy we want.
Mhm.
Somebody who makes a good impression. We'll help them, but we won't bring them into our 18-month program. We want folks who make bad impressions, just because that's kind of who we are, and we want to be able to stay anchored in really accompanying people accompanying the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And so we try to imagine, in society, a circle of compassion, and then really insist on imagining nobody standing outside that circle. And so we kind of want to represent that, but and we don't really care what our numbers say. We're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful, and we want to stay anchored in really walking with folks who are everybody else has given up on.
Yeah, I wonder, that with getting the more difficult cases, if you will, and how is it, I guess, without recruiting? I mean, is it word of mouth? What makes that person make that first step towards coming towards Homeboy for the 18-month program? Is it success stories? Is it that are shared in the community? Is it a respect or reverence for the parish or outreach work? I mean, what?
Well,
how does it happen?
I think part of the thing is it's like recovery. So in recovery from alcohol or drugs, they'll always say it takes what it takes. And the same is true of gang recovery, if you will. It's the birth of a son, a death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. It takes what it takes. But I mean, a mother came in to see me the other day, wanted some help with her son, who was addicted to meth and extremely erratic behavior. And, I said, you and I can't, there's nothing we can do without him, and no amount of us wanting him to go to rehab will ever be the same as him wanting to go to rehab. Mm-hmm. So it's the same principle at Homeboy. So you wait for people, but there's something thrilling about the swinging of the front door, that once you come in, there's an aroma, a homie said to me once. and it's true. There's some kind of palpable sense of the place that's that really keeps people coming back. And so it's it's the principle of attraction more than anything else.
Sure. Shifting just a little bit, we had a question in the chat that said, has your mission and work found it necessary at times to critique government policies and at times critique our Catholic culture in America that ignores those persons on the margins?
Yeah, only all the time, but I think, it's a funny thing, I think in my early years, because I was bearing sometimes 8 kids in a 3-week period, and I would give talks or preach or something, and I'd shake my fist a lot. I don't do that anymore. I invite people to their goodness. You don't want to enfeeble people with guilt. You just want to, people have a longing, both in the church and outside the church. They have a longing to connect themselves to some wider, more spacious, expansive sense of things, just like our God is always trying to move beyond, this puny sense. And how do we get to a larger view, and so if you invite people to that, they're drawn to it. And I learned that early on, if I shake my fist, it's about me. But
Mm.
if I invite people to their own goodness and spacious, tender heart, then it's about us. And it's not about what's more effective. Again, it's always about what's more true and good and just and right. And you want to stay anchored in that, and and feel sustained in the God who loves us without measure and without regret. And you just want to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving, and kind. And all the while, you want to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. It's how you stay anchored in the marrow of the message, of inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And if we take those four things seriously, then we're aligned, with the heart of God. And so I think that's kind of the essential thing.
Anchored in the marrow of the message. That'll preach. The one last question. That's shifting even one other thing that came in even more. How do you maintain your positive attitude? What are your sources of renewal and/or inspiration? Be they historical figures, models of faith, scripture, contemporary leaders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
No, it's always the same source, which is, you kind of you get to this thing of the Christ in me recognizes the Christ in you, and so you delight in the people in front of you, in front of the homies and the homegirls, and you receive them, and your heart is altered and changed forever by them. So it's sort of how you don't burn out. Burnout is not about people being too compassionate. Never. Again, if you're burning out, you've allowed it to become about you. But it's eternally replenishing to keep it to be about them, to always be other-centered and find your true self in loving and delighting in the present moment. And you have to live in the living room, which is where it's all happening. Otherwise, you're lamenting what happened yesterday, or you're anxious about tomorrow. But if you can stay, present and delighting to the folks who are in front of you. So that's, and it doesn't mean you don't get frustrated or you want to,
I know.
you get frustrated. But you also want to have a light grasp on these things. And my friend Mirabai Starr, who's a mystic and who writes about the mystics, she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And I think it's a helpful thing, because knowing the God of love is really seeing the person in front of you. Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. And then you're always constantly inhabiting your dignity and nobility together. It happens mutually. And then it's this God that's larger than we could ever imagine. And then it's never about some tiny puny gain or success. And that's where the joy is. My joy, yours, your joy complete, which is God's hope for us all.
Once again, you've shared with me exactly what I need to hear personally with Ralph McLeod and the same 155, 160 participants who are listening. I think I can speak on behalf of them too, that you've touched us yet one more time, and we're just a fraction of the hundreds of thousands of folks who you touched over the years. So thank you for being the tremendous gift that you are, and staying true to the mission, despite obstacles and difficulties that you may have. So with that, I'm going to
thank you all very much. An honor to be with you.
And turn it back over to Chris Ann. God bless. Continue. Thank you for your wonderful work.
What a joy, Father Greg. Thank you so much. Always so good to hear your stories. It's like a direct portal right to the feeding the soul every time. So thank you. I think we have, in terms of closing, we just wanted to say that we'll see the Harm, Healing, and Human Dignity folks back on Saturday. That's the day that we're reconvening. We want to make you aware that we have a number of resources on our, certainly on the Catholic Mobilizing webpage, but also the conference webpage. Tonight we're highlighting the Mercy in Action resource, which is calling for clemency for those who are facing imminent execution. So keep that in mind. You can sign up for the Mercy in Action project from the link in the chat. Again, we're regathering back on Saturday for morning mass. We are so grateful that Bishop David O'Connell from the Diocese of Los Angeles will be with us, and that will be at 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Father Greg, Ralph, and everybody who joined us tonight, thank you for coming, and we're grateful. Blessings on your evening.
Take care. Good night.